Hello, grade 12s. Welcome back. It's Economics with me, Spiwe. And just before the break, we were looking at economic profits, and now we are going to move on and look at economic losses. So we're looking at individual businesses, and we are focusing on the short run, where we don't have new businesses or competitors coming into the market space, but we're dealing with businesses that are already in this market. It is difficult in the short run to have new businesses coming in. Also, remember that only the variable costs of the factors of production can actually change, but not the fixed cost as you would see in the long run. So let's get going with this. So we have our graph over here. It's looking at the economic losses that may be incurred by an individual business or firm. So what are some of the observations that we can see from this graph? And I'll refer back to it. So given a market price of P3, so P3 would be our market price over there, profit is maximized where MR equals to MC, which is at point E. E3. So we've established a few things. We know what the market price is. It's P3. And we know that profit will be maximized at E3. So let's go to our graph and just interact with this information. Okay, so here's P3. P3 is our market price. And also we are told that profit will be maximized where MC equals to, where MR, equals to MC, which will be our E3, okay, and this is this point, okay. So we've got our price, our market price over there, and then also over there we've got our E3, which is the point where we're going to maximize our profit. And at this point, MR equals to MC. Okay, so this occurs at a quantity of Q3. We did see that, that our quantity over here is Q3. So the market price will be set there, and our profits will be maximized at this particular point, and where the quality is Q3. So we've established what the market price is, and then also a point where profits will be maximized and the quantity that will allow for this particular situation to happen. So do note that. Also at Q3, the firm's average revenue, which is AR, per unit of production is P3. So let's go and find the average revenue that we can see. So here's the average revenue of the firm, and then we can see that it is sitting at P3. So that's where we find the average revenue of the firm, and also it is a point where the firm will maximize its profit at a quantity of Q3. So the average cost per unit is C3, which is higher than the price of P3. Remember, in our previous, I will go there, when we were discussing the economic profits, remember the focus now is the economic losses. And now you will see that we have our market price over here, but the cost per unit, C3, is above the market price. So this will then say that we are making a loss because in our previous graph, when we were looking at the economic profits, we could see that our average cost price was below our market price there, which is P3. So hence we were making a profit over here. But now that we are incurring a loss, we can see that our costs are higher than the market price. So that would obviously result in a loss. So the average cost per unit is C3, which is higher than the price of P3, and that will result in an economic loss. So the firm is making an economic loss per unit of production, which is equal to the difference between C3 and P3. And I've explained that. Let's just go back. I don't want nominal as yet. Yes, there we are. I want the economic losses. Okay, so here's our market price over there at P3. And then at E3, we are maximizing our profits. And the quantity there would be Q3. Now, our cost per unit is higher than our market price. So now we're going to have this difference between the P3 and the C3, our market price and our cost per unit, where our cost per unit is higher than our market price. And then that situation results in an economic loss. So it's not an ideal situation to have because we're running at a loss. But if our cost per unit was over here, that would be considered as an economic profit because our market price will be above or will be higher than the cost per unit. So we call that an economic loss. Okay, so then this sums up what happens in a situation where a company is faced with a situation or where a company or a firm is making an economic loss per unit. So that means that your average cost per unit is higher than your price or your market price, which is at P3. So what happens in a situation where we've got a nominal profit? Okay, so now we're looking at nominal profit. So what happens? So given a market price of P2, so that would be the market price as determined by the forces of supply and demand, profit is maximized where MR equals to MC, which is P2. Okay, so let's go and find our market price over here. So here's our market price over here. So I'm just going to move my graph a bit up. Oh, there we are, so that we can have a clear view of what it looks like. Okay, so my screen is, there we are, now it's behaving. Okay, so that's P2. So P2 there will be our market price. So I'm going to write over here. So P2 will be our market price. Okay, so we've noted that. And then also now we've got our MR rate equals to our MC, and we'll come back to that just now. So this occurs at a quantity of Q2. So let's go and have a look at our quantity. Here's our quantity over here. So it's Q2. So here's our market price. And then at a quantity of Q2, then the average cost per unit. Okay, so I'm going to go back and back again. There we are. So at Q2, the firm's average revenue per unit of production is P2, which is also equal to the average cost per unit, which is C2. So we've got quite an interesting situation here where our market price, which is P2, is actually equal to our average cost per unit, which is C2. So since AR equals to AC, the firm earns a nominal profit since all its costs are fully covered. Point E2 is usually called the break-even point. So it's a point where we are covering our costs, we're not making a profit, and we're also not making a loss. So all our costs are fully covered, and hence we call it a nominal profit, because in this particular instance, P2 does equal to, okay, go back, sorry about that. So at this point, so we can see that P2 equals to C2. So a company or a firm is able to cover all its costs here, and we call that a break-even point. So ET will be our break-even point where we are covering all our costs. We may not have made a profit, but also we've not incurred a loss. So we call this a point where we break even. So it's important that we note that. Okay, so that sums up what nominal profits are all about. So your AC and your P2 will be equal, and we break even. We are able to cover all our costs, and we haven't incurred any losses in that regard. Okay, so now let's move on so that we can sum up our lesson beautifully and also give you a few pointers for our next lesson. So in this lesson, we covered the following concepts. We've looked at what a market is. We said it is an institution or a mechanism that brings together the buyers and sellers of goods or a service. Okay, so we said it doesn't have to be a physical place where buyers and sellers meet to exchange goods and services, but it could be a mechanism that is put into place that brings them together. The buyer and the seller of goods and a service. And then also we looked at what a market structure is, because that's something that's also quite important. So it is best defined as the organizational, okay, so it's an organizational and other characteristics of a market. We focus on those characteristics which affect the nature of competition and pricing, but it is important not to place too much emphasis simply on the market share of the existing firms in an industry. So two things that are important there is the competition and the pricing. Are other firms allowed to come into the market space and participate? What are the rules in terms of exit and entry into that market? Are there any restrictions that are put into place to try and block other competitors from coming into that market? And also, who determines the price? Is it one individual firm that has the power to influence and determine the price, or do the market forces play an important role when it comes to determining the price or the market price in that particular market? Okay, so it's important that you look at competition and how actually competition influences the pricing, because there is a relationship between competition and pricing, because if you've got more competitors in the market, it makes it difficult for one single individual firm to determine the market price. But because everybody has a small piece of the market, so the forces of demand and supply have to kick in. And also just look at the nature of the product. If it is a unique product and it hasn't got any substitute products, then that falls under a monopoly, because you've got one business that offers that unique product or service. And obviously, because they are the sole providers of that particular product, then they can influence the price in that. So there's that considerable amount of influence that you would find under a monopoly, because you are dealing with a single individual firm that actually has power to play around with pricing as well. And also with perfect competition, because this is an ideal situation where there are less restrictions that are put into place. So businesses can come in and out as they please without any restrictions or barriers that are put into place in order to block other companies or firms from coming into the market space. So it's important that we are aware of that when we are trying to understand what market structures are, because there is that important interaction between competition and price. Also, who determines the price in a freely competitive market? The forces of supply and demand. And also remember to know what a short run and a long run is. That over a short run, we're only going to have changes, variable changes in terms of the factors of production, and that we may not have new firms entering that market because it happens over a short period of time. But in the long run, you could have new firms coming in, and also there's an opportunity for existing firms to leave that market space. So there is a freedom in terms of movement into a long run production system as to a short run, because short run happens over a short period of time, and therefore it does make it difficult for new firms to come in And in the long run, new firms can come in because of the duration. It happens over a long period of time. So there is an opportunity for new entrants to come into the market space. Well, that's a wrap from me, Usphiwe. I trust you've enjoyed today's lesson. I wish you all the best as you study and look forward to seeing you joining me on our next lesson. From me, it's a wrap. Take care. Bye-bye.